The crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the ballroom, bouncing off sequined gowns and polished champagne flutes, but all I felt was the heat of Lily's words searing through the noise. "No one wants you here." Her voice was crisp, perfectly pitched to cut through the countdown cheer that had just begun echoing through the room. Around us, guests held sparklers, couples pressed close for midnight kisses, and my own mother nodded in solemn agreement as if my sister had pronounced a truth too obvious to contest. My chest locked tight. I stood frozen in my metallic blue dress, one hand clenched around the stem of my untouched champagne glass. I waited for anyone to break the spell, to laugh, to say it was just a cruel joke. But silence spread around our table like spilled wine. I could hear my own pulse louder than the band's trumpet. At the edge of the stage, the MC raised his microphone, oblivious to the cruelty unraveling in the shadows, while my family turned away from me like I was a stain on the evening. I pressed my nails into the smooth glass, grounding myself in the sting of my own skin. My sister's face gleamed with satisfaction, the spotlight catching her diamond earrings. For her, this was a performance, my humiliation set against the glittering backdrop of the city's grandest New Year's Eve gala. I had been invisible before, ignored through countless Christmas mornings and Thanksgiving dinners, but this was worse. This was being erased publicly, deliberately, like a scar they wanted to peel from the family portrait. The sting was sharper because of the timing, midnight approaching fireworks, ready to claim the sky, and yet in that suspended moment, I knew something inside me had cracked beyond repair. Lily's words carried me back years, yanking me through time, as if every injustice had been rehearsed for this stage. I was 8 again, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, watching her unwrap a designer doll, while I tugged at the sleeves of a second-hand coat, the tag still dangling from the collar. Mother had said it kindly, like an apology. "Lily deserves nice things. You don't need to be spoiled." I had nodded then, tiny and pliable, believing maybe it was true. That memory collided with another, the Thanksgiving dinner when the pumpkin pie burned, because Lily forgot to set the oven, and yet it was me who felt my father's glare, as he declared, "Emily, how could you ruin dessert for everyone?" I had been their scapegoat so long that it almost felt natural to absorb the blow. Almost. But standing there in the ballroom, champagne fizz tickling my nose, I felt the absurdity of it all. I was 29, not 8, and still I was the one shoved into the shadows, blamed for shadows I hadn't cast. My mind replayed senior year, how I had saved every dollar from 2 part-time jobs, dreaming of a used car that would mean freedom. How father had demanded that money at the last minute to buy Lily a brand new laptop. He hadn't even flinched while I stood there empty-handed, my dreams traded away for her convenience. Later, when I confronted him, he waved it off. Don't be selfish. Family helps each other. But family, I had learned, meant I gave and she received. The countdown ticked lower. 10, 9, 8. My breath snagged in my throat. I should have turned on my heel right then, but my body betrayed me, frozen under the chandeliers. Mother's eyes pinned me like a bug on glass. "You should be grateful," she whispered sharply, leaning in close. "Your sister doesn't need your shadow tonight." My mouth tasted of iron, though I hadn't touched the champagne. My sister clung to her fiancé's arm, her smile smug, as if my exclusion was the final decoration to her perfect evening. 7, 6, 5. The MC's booming voice cut across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor someone extraordinary." I blinked, certain he was about to crown Lily with yet another undeserved spotlight. But instead, he read from his card, his voice swelling. "We celebrate the founder of a $3 billion company, a woman who built her success from nothing, Emily Parker." The room stilled as though someone had yanked the plug from the music. Forks clattered against plates, the band stumbled mid-note. 200 faces turned toward me in collective shock. My mother's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Lily's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, fizzing out like the last echo of her smugness. the silence pressed down heavier than all their scorn combined. For a heartbeat, I didn't move. My pulse roared in my ears, mingling with the distant thump of fireworks beginning outside. Then the first cheer broke hesitant, then swelling until applause rolled through the ballroom like thunder. People who had just minutes ago shifted away from me now craned forward, hands outstretched, eager to bask in my reflected light. Strangers I had never met whispered my name, reporters angled their cameras. The same mouths that had curled in disdain now shaped the word congratulations. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I set down the untouched glass, its rim still indented with my nails, and walked away from the table. Behind me, I heard my mother call out, half plea, half command, but her voice barely reached over the applause. Lily stumbled after me, her heels clattering, words tumbling. "Emily, wait, we didn't mean," but I kept walking. Each step on the marble was a drumbeat in my chest, each stride widening the chasm between us. Outside, cold air slapped my cheeks sharper than any insult they had ever thrown. Fireworks burst overhead, painting the sky with fleeting blooms of gold and crimson. I inhaled the winter night, the scent of snow and city steel filling my lungs. My phone vibrated in my clutch once, twice, then endlessly. Messages and calls lit the screen, 100 missed attempts already piling up. Mom, Lily, even distant cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. I gripped the phone but didn't answer. Not one word. For once I let the silence be mine. The night wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine, blazing brighter than any chandelier, louder than any cruel declaration. And deep inside, for the first time in my life, I felt what freedom truly tasted like. The party music still echoed faintly in my ears as I sat alone in the small hotel room, the sequins of my dress scratching against my skin. I had pulled the curtains tight, but the glow of fireworks still leaked through the edges, staining the carpet with bursts of red and gold. My phone lay face down on the desk, buzzing every few minutes with calls I wouldn't answer. My chest felt hollow, but it wasn't from the champagne I hadn't touched. It was the words, Lily's words, my mother's nod that had burrowed deeper than any blade. "No one wants you here." They rang like a chant I had heard my entire life, disguised in different costumes, but always the same refrain. I leaned back on the stiff mattress, and in that silence, memories surged like floodwater. I was 8 years old again, staring at the twinkling lights of our family's Christmas tree. Wrapping paper scattered across the living room. Lily squealed with delight as she tore open a glossy box containing a brand new doll with hair that shimmered gold. I reached for my package, a cardboard box wrapped hastily in leftover paper. Inside was a wool coat, its collar frayed, a thrift store tag still dangling from the sleeve. My mother smiled down at me, her voice syrupy but firm. "Lily deserves nice things. You don't need to be spoiled." I had tugged the coat tighter around my small frame cheeks, burning as aunts and uncles clapped for Lily's joy. That night I told myself maybe it was okay. Maybe I didn't need what she had. But it wasn't just Christmas. It was Thanksgiving too. I could still smell the burnt crust of pumpkin pie. Lily had been assigned to bake it, her only responsibility that year. She forgot to turn the oven on. When the guests asked what happened, Father's eyes cut toward me across the dining room table. "Emily, how could you ruin dessert for everyone?" I opened my mouth to protest, but Lily's lip trembled convincingly, and Mother hushed me with a glance sharp enough to pierce bone. I took the shame into myself even though I hadn't touched that pie. The humiliation tasted like ashes in my mouth. I was always the scapegoat, the placeholder for blame. In school, when Lily was caught whispering answers during an algebra test, she sobbed in the principal's office. Emily put so much pressure on me. I just wanted to be as good as her. The lie slid smoothly into the air, and my mother's nails dug into my wrist as she told the principal it was my fault for being too perfect for making Lily feel inadequate. Later, the security footage revealed Lily had cheated on her own. No apology ever came. Not from her, not from them. By the time I was 15, I had learned that hard work was my only escape. I juggled 2 part-time jobs bagging groceries and wiping tables at the local diner to save for a used car. Every dollar I tucked into a tin box under my bed felt like a ticket out of that suffocating house. But senior year, just when I had scraped together enough, Father knocked on my door. "Your sister needs a laptop for school," he announced, not asked. I tried to protest, voice shaking, but his eyes carried the weight of command. "Don't be selfish, Emily. Family helps each other." The next day, my savings disappeared into Lily's shiny new computer. She barely thanked me before retreating into her room. I can still picture my 18th birthday. I had baked my own cake store brand mix, unevenly frosted. That morning, I opened my acceptance letter to Northwestern University, hands trembling with joy. I raced to check my college fund account, the one I had been building since I was 14. My stomach dropped when I saw the balance, $0. I scrolled through transaction history, my vision blurring, as I saw my mother's name attached to every withdrawal. Designer clothes, private tutors, concert tickets, all for Lily. She had stolen not just my money, but my future. When I showed her the printout, her face didn't even flicker with guilt. "It was for the family," she said, simply before turning back to stir her coffee. That night, Lily blew out 18 golden candles on a 3-tier cake my parents had ordered for her. Mine sat half-eaten on the counter, crumbs collapsing into themselves. The weight of those years pressed down on me in that hotel room, heavier than the sequined dress strangling my ribs. They had excluded me from inheritance discussions too. I remembered overhearing them, whispering about the will, how everything, the house, the savings, would rightfully go to Lily. When I confronted Mother, she laughed. "You'll figure things out. You're resilient." But what she meant was, "You don't matter." I rolled onto my side, staring at the cheap nightstand. My throat tightened as more memories came, unbidden and merciless. Birthdays forgotten, report cards dismissed. My dreams of art school laughed at until I tucked them away in dusty boxes. Lily's failures papered over with my sacrifices. The invisible ledger of injustice scrawled across every corner of my life. I pressed my palms together, feeling the sweat between them. If I stayed, if I kept orbiting their toxic gravity, this cycle would never end. I would always be invisible, always wrong, always the scapegoat. But stepping away meant entering the unknown, and the unknown terrified me. The idea of waking up tomorrow without a roof, guaranteed without even the meager protection of family, clenched my gut. I stood pacing the narrow strip of carpet between the bed and the window. The city skyline pulsed with fireworks, each burst a heartbeat I could feel in my chest. "Where do you go when home stops being home?" I whispered the question aloud, my voice hoarse in the stillness. I thought of the bookstore where I worked now, the one place I felt marginally seen. Stacking novels late into the night, inhaling the scent of paper and ink. It was humble, but it was mine. Yet even there, I wore Lily's shadow like a second skin. My coworkers whispered about my perfect sister, about how lucky I must be. If only they knew. I drew back the curtain fully. Outside, families toasted, couples embraced, voices rose in laughter. The world kept turning indifferent to the fracture in my chest. I wrapped my arms around myself, rocking slightly, as tears welled hot against my lashes. "Maybe they're right," I whispered. "Maybe no one wants me here." But then something unexpected surged up, sharp and insistent. Not defiance exactly, more like a stubborn ember refusing to die. If they didn't want me, then maybe I didn't need them. If they stripped me of Christmas mornings, Thanksgivings, birthdays, even my college fund, then maybe I could strip them of the power to define me. The thought landed like a stone in calm water, rippling outward. My gaze flicked to the door, to the small suitcase propped against the wall. I imagined zipping it shut, walking out, leaving their voices behind. Could I really? Would I survive? My hands shook as I reached for the suitcase handle, even just to test the weight. It felt heavier than its contents, like I was lifting the whole history of betrayal in that single grip. I set it down, heart hammering. The clock ticked past midnight. The fireworks faded. The silence returned. If I stayed, I knew the script: more blame, more sacrifice, more erasure. If I left, I had nothing, no inheritance, no will, no safety net. Only $70 hidden in my wallet, and a worn notebook of sketches from dreams long buried. I sat back on the bed, staring at the slice of dark sky framed by the window. A thought whispered through me, half question, half dare. What if freedom is worth the fear? I didn't have an answer, but for the first time, I wanted to find one. The morning after the gala, I sat at the hotel's kitchenette, staring into a paper cup of bitter coffee. The sequin dress from last night hung in a crumpled heap over the chair, still reeking of perfume and humiliation. My reflection in the microwave door looked older than 29 eyes ringed with shadows, lips chapped from sleepless nights. I kept replaying the sound of my sister's voice. "No one wants you here." My mother's nod had sealed it like a verdict. By noon, I couldn't take the walls of the hotel room pressing in. I checked out, dragging my suitcase down the hallway carpet that smelled faintly of bleach. The cab ride to my parents' house felt like drifting into a storm I'd already survived too many times. Snow flurried outside, frosting the windshield. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, my chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I knew they'd be waiting. They always were, ready to twist my presence into a confrontation I never asked for. The front door creaked when I pushed it open. My mother stood in the hallway, arms folded across her cashmere sweater, her posture blocking the staircase. The living room smelled of pot roast and lemon polish, familiar scents soured by her scowl. "You'll come crawling back," she said, her voice clipped, certain. "You have nothing, Emily. You'll be back within a week." My grip tightened on the suitcase handle. Behind her, Lily leaned casually against the banister, sipping from a mug, as if the night before had been a dream she didn't need to remember. Her smirk was a mirror of every birthday forgotten, every Christmas overshadowed. "Poor Emily," she crooned, "still working at that little bookstore, still pretending she matters. You'll never have an inheritance, never be part of the will. Why even try?" The words pricked my skin like glass shards. I forced myself to meet her eyes, my throat dry. "You cheated your way through school. You lied. You took everything. None of that is on me." Her smile faltered for just a second, but Mother snapped forward, nails biting into my arm. "This family has done everything for you," she hissed. "And this is how you repay us." By making Jessica, she caught herself the slip of calling Lily by another name, as if all her golden children blurred together. By making Lily feel like she'll never be good enough. I pulled my arm free, skin tingling where her nails had dug crescents. The confrontation hung between us like a thundercloud about to break. For once I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. The silence in the house was thick enough that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I turned and dragged my suitcase upstairs. My room, the smallest one at the end of the hall, felt less like home and more like a storage closet for memories no one wanted. The posters from high school curled at the edges, the mattress sagged, and the curtains let in thin slices of gray light. I stuffed clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed the worn leather notebook where I'd sketched designs and dreams I never dared to chase, and tucked the envelope with 70 crumpled dollars into my coat pocket. On the dresser sat a picture frame me at 7 years old, hair in crooked braids, grinning with missing teeth. I stared at the smile of a child who hadn't yet understood what scapegoat meant. I slid the photo into my bag, not because I wanted to remember, but because I wanted proof of how far I had come when I finally left. When I stepped back into the hallway, Mother stood at the bottom of the stairs, her expression carved from stone. "Go on," she sneered. "Leave. But don't come crying to me when the world chews you up." I didn't answer. I brushed past her through the front door and into the cold. Snowflakes stung my cheeks sharp as needles. The suitcase wheels snagged on the uneven sidewalk as I walked toward the bus stop, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, I heard the door slam, the sound echoing like the closing of a cell. By the time I reached the city, center dusk had fallen. The street lamps glowed pale yellow, casting long shadows across slush-stained sidewalks. My legs trembled from dragging the suitcase, and my fingers burned from gripping the handle in the wind. I had nowhere to go. Pride kept me from calling the two friends who might have offered a couch. To ask for help felt too close to proving my mother right. I wandered until I saw the flickering neon sign of the 24-hour train station. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with diesel fumes and burnt coffee. A handful of figures dotted the rows of plastic chairs. A man in a rumpled business suit sprawled across 3 seats, a woman clutching a garbage bag of clothes, a teenager rocking back and forth muttering to himself. I chose a corner near the vending machines, hugging my duffel bag to my chest, as if it could shield me from the chill that seeped into my bones. The tile floor was cold enough to numb my feet through thin soles. My stomach growled, but I kept the $70 buried deep in my pocket. Who knew when I'd have more? My head bobbed as I drifted in and out of shallow sleep, jerking awake at every shuffle of footsteps, every crackle of the PA system, announcing departures. Sometime past midnight, my phone buzzed. I flinched, thinking it was another call from my mother, but the number was unfamiliar, an area code I didn't recognize. My heart thumped as I opened the message. "You don't know me, but I owe you an explanation." The words glowed on the screen, stark against the darkness. My pulse pounded in my ears. Was it a stranger? A trap? A friend of Lily's sent to twist the knife deeper. I looked around the station, the muttering teenager, the woman clutching her garbage bag, the man snoring on the bench. None of them looked up. I tucked the phone back into my pocket, fingers trembling. I had thought the world couldn't possibly hold more shadows than the ones I had left behind in my parents' house. But as I sat in that freezing station, surrounded by strangers and silence, I realized the truth. This was only the beginning. The fluorescent lights of the station hummed above me as dawn crept through the grime-streaked windows. My neck ached from sleeping against the hard plastic chair, my duffel bag still clutched to my chest like a lifeline. Around me, commuters began to file in, their coats buttoned neatly, their shoes polished, coffee cups steaming in their hands. I caught my reflection in the glass panel opposite, hair-tangled, shirt-wrinkled eyes hollow. I looked like a ghost haunting the edges of their normal lives. I stood legs stiff and walked into the freezing morning. My breath clouded in the air as I scanned storefronts along the main street. Most still dark, but a few displayed hopeful help-wanted signs. I clung to those words like a lifeline. The first was a fast food chain. Inside, the manager barely glanced up from his phone before muttering, "Not hiring." The next was a boutique clothing store. The woman behind the counter wrinkled her nose at my clothes and said, "We're looking for someone with more polish." Her eyes skimmed me like I was lint. My cheeks burned as I backed out. At a coffee shop, the barista handed me an application, but the manager shook his head the moment he saw my trembling hands. "We're full up." Rejection after rejection piled like bricks on my shoulders. By noon, hunger gnawed at me. I pressed my palm against my stomach, willing it silent. I still had the 70 crumpled dollars in my coat, but every instinct screamed to save it. I walked until my feet blistered, until the city blurred into a haze of neon signs and gray buildings. That's when I spotted it, a narrow diner tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, its neon sign flickering. Lopez's Home Cooking. The bell jingled when I pushed the door. Grease and coffee, and something sweet lingered in the air. A woman with steel gray hair, tied in a bun, stood behind the counter, barking orders at a young waiter. Her name tag read Mariana. She turned to me, eyes sharp, and took in everything: my wrinkled shirt, the duffel bag, the exhaustion I couldn't hide. "Ever wash dishes before?" she asked. "No," I admitted, voice raw. "But I can learn." She studied me for half a heartbeat, then jerked her chin toward the swinging door. "Apron's on the hook. Don't break anything." The kitchen swallowed me in heat. Steam rose from boiling pots, grease coated the counters, and the mountain of dishes seemed endless. I plunged my hands into scalding water and scrubbed until my fingers pruned and ached. My back screamed from bending over, but I refused to stop. Hour after hour plates clattered, pans hissed, and my body kept moving like a machine. By closing time, my arms hung limp at my sides. Mariana pressed $40 into my palm. Cash. The bills crumpled and damp with soap suds, but they felt like victory. I whispered a thank you and stepped back into the icy night. On the way to the station, I bought a sandwich from a street vendor. Halfway through eating it, I noticed a woman huddled by the curb, clutching a blanket full of clothes. Her eyes followed each bite I took. Without thinking, I tore the sandwich in half and handed her a piece. She smiled, toothless but genuine, and as she took it, she tilted her head. "That smells nice," she murmured, pointing to my bag. Confused, I unzipped it slightly. A faint lavender scent drifted out. The old candle I'd shoved inside was still intact, the one I'd made years ago on a rare afternoon when the house had been empty. I remembered melting wax in a battered pot, pouring it carefully into mismatched jars, watching them harden into something fragile but mine. The woman inhaled, deeply sighing. "Beautiful," she whispered, closing her eyes. For a moment her face looked peaceful, softened by the scent. I walked away with a strange tightness in my chest. That little candle had survived years of neglect, a dozen moves, and now it sparked something I hadn't felt in so long. Possibility. Back at the station, exhaustion dragged me down again. I slipped my card into the ATM across the street, hoping to see a small balance from my college fund, something I could cling to. The screen blinked balance, $0. My stomach dropped. Hands trembling, I pulled up the transaction history. There it was, multiple withdrawals, all under Margaret Parker's name. Concert tickets, designer stores, private tutors for Lily. My breath hitched. She hadn't just stolen my future once. She was still stealing, still using my name as if it belonged to her. I stumbled back to the bench, my body shaking from more than cold. Rage flared hot, searing through the numbness. All those nights I had gone hungry, all the shifts I had worked, every sacrifice I had made, and she was still digging her claws into my life. But as the fury settled, something else rose. A steel thread wound tight through my chest. If Margaret Parker could steal my future, then I would build one so vast, so untouchable, that she could never reach it. The next morning, Mariana found me scrubbing pots with mechanical precision. She raised an eyebrow. "Need more hours?" "Yes," I said quickly, desperate. "My friend owns a coffee shop," she said, drying her hands on her apron. "She needs help. You want?" And I froze, sponge dripping suds onto my shoes. 2 jobs meant twice the exhaustion, but also twice the escape velocity. "When can I start?" That evening, after my shift at Lopez's, I walked into Bean and Brew, the coffee shop her friend owned. The smell of espresso wrapped around me like a blanket. Customers lined the counter, and the hum of conversation filled the air. The owner, a man with a kind smile, handed me an apron. "Head down, keep moving, and smile," he instructed. I nodded, slipping it on. My hand shook as I fumbled with the espresso machine, but slowly I found a rhythm. The pay wasn't much, but when I held that first paycheck, a real check with my name typed clean across the top, I nearly cried. Every dollar was a brick in the wall I was building between myself and the voices that had crushed me for years. Still, each night when I collapsed onto my thin mattress at the station or in the cheap room, I'd found fear gnawed at me. How long could I keep this up? How long before exhaustion broke me? But then I would light that lavender candle. The flame danced stubborn and small, but it filled the room with comfort I had never found in my parents' house. I would stare into the glow and think, maybe this is the seed of something bigger. And I clung to that thought even as the shadows of the past tried to choke it out. The alarm blared at 4 a.m, shrill and merciless. I rolled off the sagging mattress in my rented room, every muscle screaming from the double shift I had pulled the day before. My fingers were cracked from dish soap, my back still stiff from hauling bins of plates at Lopez's, and my eyes stung from the steam of espresso machines at Bean and Brew. I dragged myself upright anyway. Rent wasn't going to pay itself. By dawn, I was at the diner again, apron already damp from grease splatters. I scrubbed pans until the metal gleamed, carried stacks of dishes that towered above my head, and kept moving until my body blurred into routine. At noon, I crossed the street to the coffee shop, tying a second apron around my waist. The bell chimed endlessly as customers piled in, ordering complicated lattes and snapping when I got the syrup wrong. "You put regular vanilla instead of sugar-free," a woman in a cream-colored blazer snapped, thrusting the cup back at me. Her lipstick was perfect, her tone venomous. Why do they even hire people who can't do their jobs properly? My cheeks burned, but I forced a smile. I'll remake it. Inside rage bubbled like scalding milk in the steamer. If only she knew. If only any of them knew that I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, that I was splitting my life between sinks full of dishes and counters full of coffee stains just to avoid sleeping on the train station floor. Again. I remade her drink once, twice, until finally she accepted it with a sniff of disdain. By closing, I collapsed on the break room chair, hands shaking from caffeine fumes and exhaustion. That night, when I returned to my tiny rented room, the springs of the mattress dug into my back. I didn't bother to change clothes. I just lay there, staring at the cracked ceiling, too tired to even cry. Then, a faint scent drifted through the air, lavender. My eyes slid toward the corner where the old candle I had carried from my parents' house sat on the dresser. I pulled it closer, lighting it with the last match in the box. The small flame flickered uncertainly, then grew steady. The scent wrapped around me, soft and familiar. I remembered the first time I had made one, melting leftover wax in an old pot while my family was out shopping for Lily's birthday. I had poured the wax into empty jars scavenged from the recycling bin, proud of the colors I had layered carefully. For a few minutes I had felt in control of something beautiful. The memory clung to me now like a lifeline. My body was breaking my pride, worn thin, but here was proof I could create instead of just endure. I sat up, staring at my laptop on the rickety desk. My bank balance glowed a measly $212.47. Barely enough for rent, barely enough for groceries. If I spent it on supplies and failed, I'd have nothing. My mother's voice hissed in my head. "You'll fail, you always do." I hesitated, finger hovering over the mouse. Then slowly, I clicked place order. Wax, essential oils, jars, wicks. Everything I needed to try again. 3 days later, my room was filled with the warm scent of melting wax. I measured temperatures, obsessively tested fragrance ratios, adjusted colors until they layered like sunsets in glass. My fingers blistered from heat, my counters stained with dye, but each candle hardened into something tangible, something mine. At night, I photographed them under the harsh bathroom light, trying to make them look professional. I typed descriptions that felt like whispered prayers: comfort, peace. A flame to guide you home. I uploaded the pictures, heart pounding, and clicked publish. The shop went live, lunar flame candles. I refreshed the page obsessively between shifts at Bean and Brew, waiting for something, anything. Days passed. Nothing. My confidence shrank with every refresh. My mother's voice grew louder. "What made you think anyone would want this?" Then one afternoon, as I scrubbed mugs in the coffee shop sink, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A notification. My breath caught. "You've made a sale." My knees buckled and I had to grip the counter. Someone, an actual stranger, had paid $12 for one of my candles. I stared at the order confirmation until my vision blurred. $12 wasn't enough to change my life, but it was proof. Proof that I wasn't invisible, that something I had created could be wanted. That night, I wrapped the candle carefully in brown paper, tied it with string, and slipped a handwritten thank you note inside. My hands trembled as I dropped the package at the post office counter. I walked out smiling for the first time in months, but the high lasted less than a week. 8 days later, the reviews started. Poor quality. Arrived broken. Smells like chemicals. Worst purchase ever. My stomach turned to ice as I read the usernames: Margaret1962. Lily Shops. My pulse roared in my ears. They had found me. My mother and sister hadn't been content to steal my money and erase my childhood. They wanted to poison even this small flicker of hope. Later that night, I discovered a Reddit thread. Lily's username was unmistakable. She mocked my pathetic little candle shop, laughing at my desperate attempts to matter. I sank onto the mattress, my laptop sliding from my lap. Tears burned hot against my skin. All I had wanted was to build something of my own, and still they clawed their way back into my life, dragging me down. I thought of the nights I had been excluded from Christmas dinners, the birthdays forgotten, the college fund stolen, the endless blame. And now this sabotage dressed up as criticism. For a long time I sat in silence, fists clenched, throat aching with unshed sobs. But somewhere beneath the despair, something colder stirred. A whisper steady as the flame of a candle. If they want me to stay down, then I'll rise higher than they can reach. I blew out the lavender candle, watching the smoke curl upward. Tomorrow I would light it again. Tomorrow I would start over. They had taken almost everything, but they hadn't taken my hands, my will, or the ember burning in my chest. And that, I decided, was enough to begin again. The bell above the coffee shop door jingled as I wiped down the counter, exhaustion pulling at my shoulders. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket, and when I pulled it out, I froze. A notification lit the screen. "You've made a sale." My breath hitched. Then another ping. And another. My knees nearly buckled as I read the words. I'd been desperate to see real orders from real customers. My hands shook as I rushed home that night. The hallway of my building reeked of stale cigarettes. The radiator clanged like it was dying, but I didn't care. I laid every jar and candle carefully across the chipped kitchen table, wrapping them in brown paper, tying each with string. I slipped handwritten notes inside, clumsy, heartfelt lines like, "Thank you for supporting small business," because it mattered to me that someone knew how much their order meant. When I dropped the packages at the post office the next morning, my chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The woman behind the counter smiled at my stack of boxes. "Busy shop?" she asked. I nodded, throat too tight to answer. Busy shop. My shop. For the next few days, I lived on adrenaline. Between shifts at Lopez's Diner and Bean and Brew, I checked my phone constantly. Every ping was a spark, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't doomed to be invisible forever. I began to imagine a future where I wasn't only the scapegoat, the poor sister, the forgotten daughter. Then one morning, as I poured a customer's latte, my phone vibrated again. I slipped it out of my pocket, expecting another order. Instead, the words on the screen made my stomach twist. Review posted 1 star. I stared. My palms grew clammy. Poor quality. Smells like chemicals. Don't waste your money. I swallowed hard, brushing it off. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe shipping had gone wrong. But within hours, another review appeared. Then another, each more venomous than the last. Amateur work. Ugly jars. Total scam. That night I sat hunched at my desk, my face lit only by the glow of my laptop screen. My breath quickened as I scrolled through the usernames. Margaret 1962, Lily Shops. The blood drained from my face. My hands trembled over the keyboard. My mother and sister, they had found me. Even here, even in this fragile new life I was trying to build, they had clawed their way in. My chest constricted as though invisible hands pressed down, forcing me back into the old cycle: blame, humiliation, erasure. They weren't content with stealing my college fund, with excluding me from holidays, with telling me no one wants you here. Now they wanted to sabotage the only thing I had created for myself. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I clicked away from the shop page and, against my better judgment, opened Reddit. The thread hit me like a punch, posts mocking me, screenshots of my candles, captions dripping with contempt. Pathetic little candle shop. Desperate attempt to matter. The username was unmistakably Lily's. My laptop screen blurred as the tears finally spilled over. My hands balled into fists, nails digging crescents into my palms. I had worked double shifts, slept in train stations, starved, just to save a few dollars for wax and jars, and they were laughing. I curled onto the mattress knees to chest the old lavender candle burning beside me. Its flame wavered stubborn against the draft sneaking through the cracked window. I stared into the glow, remembering every moment I'd been shoved aside every time they'd chosen her over me. A knock on the coffee shop counter startled me the next evening. Riley, my co-worker, with electric blue hair, tilted her head watching me fumble with the register. "What's wrong with you? You look like you're plotting a murder." I blinked rapidly, wiping at my eyes. "I'm fine." "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England." She folded her arms, refusing to move until I met her gaze. Spill. Something in her expression cracked my defenses. Words poured out: the Etsy shop, the first sale, the sabotage, the reviews, the Reddit thread. My voice trembled, shame dripping from every confession. I braced myself for pity or mockery. Instead, Riley's eyes lit with fire. "Dude, you need TikTok." I blinked. "What, you heard me?" TikTok. Social media. That's where people blow up. That's where small businesses get seen. She grinned, already pulling out her phone. "And lucky for you, I'm good at this stuff." Before I could protest, she was arranging my sample candles on the counter, adjusting the light to catch the shimmer of wax. She filmed with practiced ease, her voice playful and bright. "Small businesses deserve support. Let's get this girl some orders." I wanted to stop her, to tell her it was pointless. That my family would find me again, that they'd poison whatever good I managed to touch. But Riley looked at me with such certainty that for the first time in weeks I let someone else carry the weight. That night I went home, convinced nothing would come of it. Just another dead end. I set the candle on my nightstand, laid down, and closed my eyes. The next morning my phone buzzed before the alarm. I groaned, reaching for it, then sat bolt upright. 1,000 views. My thumbs shook as I refreshed. 2,000,000, then 5,000,000. Comments poured in. "These candles look amazing. Supporting small business. Where can I buy?" My Etsy inbox exploded with orders 10, 50, 100. I dropped the phone onto the bed, my chest heaving. My pulse roared louder than the radiator. I pressed both hands to my mouth to muffle the sob that tore free. After all their sabotage, after all their cruelty, strangers wanted what I had created. The flame was spreading, and this time they couldn't snuff it out. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop, the screen, lighting up the dark room like a strobe. At first I thought it was another nightmare, my mother calling over and over, Lily leaving cruel messages. But when my eyes focused, the numbers made my breath hitch. 10,000 views, 20,000, 50,000. My pulse pounded as I scrolled through comments. "These candles look incredible. Supporting small businesses. Where can I order?" My Etsy inbox flooded with notifications. Orders stacked one on top of another, 50, 100, 200. I pressed a hand over my mouth, half laughing, half sobbing. It was real. People I had never met wanted what I made. They wanted me. By the time I finished my diner shift, my phone had nearly overheated. I hurried back to my tiny apartment and found myself surrounded by boxes, jars, wicks, and wax. My kitchen table disappeared under mountains of supplies. I worked through the night, pouring, labeling, wrapping each candle like it was a fragile treasure. My fingertips blistered from heat, my hair stuck to my temples, but every time I taped a package shut, I felt lighter. Riley showed up after her own shift at Bean, and Brew dropping takeout containers on the counter. "You're a machine," she said, snapping pictures for TikTok. She grinned. "People love the behind-the-scenes stuff. You're going viral, Em. Keep going." I wanted to collapse, but the adrenaline was stronger than exhaustion. For once I wasn't just surviving, I was building. 2 days later, I opened my email and froze. The subject line read "Partnership Opportunity." My hands shook as I clicked it open. Lux Aroma, a luxury fragrance company, wanted to discuss a collaboration. I read the message 3 times, afraid I was hallucinating. The words glowed back, undeniable. But as soon as excitement flared, doubt followed. My mother's voice whispered in my head, "You'll never be good enough. You'll fail like always." My chest tightened. What if they were right? What if I ruined this chance the way they always predicted? Then I remembered the faces in the comments, the strangers cheering me on. I thought of Riley hands stained with wax right alongside mine, laughing as we boxed orders. And for the first time, my own voice drowned out the echo of my mother's. "Say yes," I replied with trembling fingers, agreeing to a call. Orders kept flooding in. 300 units shipped by Friday. My bank account balance ticked higher with every deposit. It wasn't just about money, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't poor Emily, the scapegoat, the forgotten one. I was a business owner, a founder, a woman who had clawed her way out of shadows and lit her own path. The studio became a war zone of cardboard and packing peanuts. Riley called in 2 more friends, and together we built an assembly line in my apartment. "This is insane," she laughed, scribbling labels while I sealed jars. "You're officially a company now." The word company lodged in my chest. For years, company had meant my parents' whispered promises of inheritance always dangled just out of my reach. Now it meant something entirely mine. At night, I lit one of my lavender sage candles and sat cross-legged on the floor inhaling the scent. I thought about Lily's words at the gala. "No one wants you here." I looked around at the dozens of packages waiting to be shipped, each with my name on the return label. Thousands of strangers wanted me. They were paying for me, and for once I didn't feel invisible. One evening as I taped the last box shut, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an order. It was a bank notification. My monthly earnings had just surpassed what I made in 3 months at the diner and coffee shop combined. My throat closed with disbelief. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered aloud I did this. I called Mariana at Lopez's the next day, my voice shaking. I think I have to quit." There was a pause. Then her warm laugh echoed through the line. "Go chase it, Mija. Go build your empire." At Bean and Brew, I handed my apron back to the manager. Riley hugged me so tightly I almost lost my breath. "Go get him, boss lady," she whispered. That night, I stood alone in my apartment, surrounded by jars stacked to the ceiling. The city lights glittered through the cracked blinds. I whispered to myself from scapegoat to founder. The lavender candle flickered beside me, its flames steady, unyielding. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth seep into my bones. Lily's laughter, my mother's scorn, all of it receded into the distance. The only voice that mattered now was mine. And it was saying, "This is just the beginning." The first day I walked into my new studio in Brooklyn, I barely recognized my own life. The space was small, a converted warehouse with peeling paint and exposed pipes, but to me, it looked like freedom. I set up folding tables, stacked jars in neat rows, lined wicks like soldiers waiting for orders. The air soon filled with the scent of lavender and sage warm wax coating the walls like a second skin. For years, my parents had reminded me that I had nothing. Now I had this 4 walls of vision and a fire inside me that refused to go out. By the end of the first week, I had shipped 300 units. My inbox buzzed with wholesale requests. One small boutique in Boston wanted 50 candles a month. A shop in Portland wanted 75. My phone pinged constantly, not with calls from my mother or sister this time, but with orders, invoices, payments. The digits in my bank account grew until I had to double-check the balance just to believe it. On a gray Tuesday morning, Riley burst through the door, waving her phone like a trophy. "Emily, you're in the paper." She shoved the screen at me. A local business journal headline glared back, "Young entrepreneur builds candle empire from scratch." My picture was grainy, pulled from my TikTok video, but it was me, my name, my work, my story. I sank onto a stool, the article blurring as tears pricked my eyes. Empire. That word hit harder than applause, harder than profit. All those Christmas mornings, when Lily unwrapped designer handbags while I tugged at thrift store coats, all the Thanksgivings when burnt pies became my fault, all the birthdays forgotten it, all led here. This was my Christmas gift, my Thanksgiving feast, my birthday celebration rolled into one. That night I opened a bottle of cheap champagne Riley had smuggled in, and we toasted over candlelit boxes. For the first time I didn't feel like a shadow. But success has a way of dragging the past into the light. 2 days later, Riley came in with a folded newspaper tucked under her arm. Her expression was tight. "You need to see this." She laid it on the table. The headline hit me like a slap. Local family faces foreclosure after years of mismanagement. My childhood home stared back at me in the grainy photograph. The yellow siding peeled the lawn, grown wild, the shutters hanging crooked. The article said Margaret Parker, my mother, was 3 months behind on mortgage payments, drowning in credit card debt. I traced the outline of the house with my fingertip, remembering the smell of lemon polish, the way the windows glowed on Christmas morning, the very place she'd once told me I wasn't wanted. "Not my problem," I whispered, folding the paper shut. Still that night I couldn't shake the image. The house that had once loomed over me like a prison now sagged under the weight of its own decay. Karma had stripped away its armor. Word spread quickly. A former neighbor messaged me on Instagram, sad to see the Parkers losing their place. Heard Lily dropped out too. My stomach tightened as I typed back a polite reply. The next morning, the confirmation came. A classmate from high school forwarded me a link to the university's disciplinary board records. Lily had been caught in multiple instances of academic dishonesty. Failed classes, loans in default, no internships, no jobs. I stared at her name on the page, hollow inside. Lily, the golden child, the flawless one, the girl they built the entire family myth around, was now a cautionary tale. But I didn't feel satisfaction, not exactly. I felt distance, like I was reading about strangers. Late one evening, as I was sealing another batch of boxes, my phone buzzed. The caller ID was unknown, but the area code made my breath catch. Home. I hesitated, thumb hovering, then swiped to answer. Emily, my mother's voice, cracked through the line. The sharpness I knew so well was gone. In its place was something fragile, almost pleading. "Sweetheart, we miss you. Family should stick together. Your sister is struggling. We all are. We need you." I pressed my lips together, letting the silence stretch. For decades, I had drowned in guilt and obligation at those words. But now they slid off me like water. I ended the call without a word. The text started immediately. "I know I was a bad sister," Lily wrote. "I was jealous. You were always better than me. Please, Emily. I have nowhere else to go." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I blocked both numbers. 3 days later, Riley burst into the studio, again eyes wide. "You've gone viral again." But not for the candles this time. She handed me her phone. On the screen was a Facebook post from Mrs. Chen, our old neighbor, the woman who used to slip me extra cookies when I helped her in her garden. Her words scrolled long and steady. I watched Emily Parker get blamed for things she didn't do her whole life. I saw her treated like a maid while Lily was worshipped. Now that Emily has a successful business, suddenly they want her back. Where was that love when she was working 3 jobs to survive? The comments section exploded with agreement. Old classmates chimed in, recounting their own stories of seeing me humiliated, of watching Lily cheat and lie her way through school. A former teacher even confirmed it. Post by post, share by share, the glossy facade my mother had built around her golden child crumbled. I scrolled through the feed, my chest tight. For so long I had believed no one saw me, that my pain vanished into the void. But now the truth was being shouted for the world to hear. I set the phone down, staring at the stacks of candles ready for shipping. The wax cooled smooth and perfect under my fingertips. For the first time, the story wasn't about what they had taken from me. It was about what I had built in spite of them. And as the house that once caged me rotted, as the sister who mocked me stumbled into ruin, I felt a quiet certainty bloom in my chest. The tables had finally turned. The receptionist's voice wavered when she called up to my office. "Emily, there are 2 women here asking to see you. They say they're your family." I knew before she even said their names. A cold calm settled over me as I rose from my desk, smoothing the sleeves of my blazer. Through the glass walls of the lobby, I spotted them before they saw me, my mother, in a faded coat that had once been designer. Her posture stiff but brittle, and Lily, beside her, hair limp, face hollow, the sparkle gone from her eyes. They looked small against the sleek marble floors, and modern art I had chosen carefully to fill this space. When they noticed me approaching, both straightened. My mother's eyes darted around the lobby, calculating, assessing the value of everything, from the abstract painting on the wall to the ergonomic chairs. Then she turned on her best performance voice, breaking at just the right places. "Emily, sweetheart," she said, reaching for me. "We've made mistakes, I see that now. But we're still family." The sound of her calling me sweetheart after decades of scorn scraped like broken glass. Lily stepped forward, her hands twisting together, her tone wobbling with desperation. "After everything, you wouldn't just abandon us, would you? We're your blood. Family helps each other, right?" I let the silence stretch, the echo of my heels filling the space as I crossed my arms and tilted my head. Their eyes searched my face for cracks, for some sign of the old Emily who bent and broke to please them. But she was gone. "Oh," I asked softly, "where were you when I needed help?" The question dropped into the air like ice. My mother blinked, her lips parting. I didn't wait for an answer. "Where were you on my birthdays when I got second-hand coats, while Lily unwrapped handbags? Where were you when you stole my college fund to pay for her tutors? Where were you at Thanksgiving when you blamed me for a burnt pie I didn't touch? Where were you when you told me at a ballroom filled with strangers that no one wanted me here?" My mother flinched as though I'd slapped her. Lily's chin trembled, her lip caught between her teeth. We thought you'd be fine on your own, my mother," stammered the mask, slipping. The practiced tears dried up, leaving only raw panic. I smiled coldly. "You were right. I was fine. I am fine. And I did it without you." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I was just a kid. I didn't know any better." I met her gaze steadily. "Now you're an adult. And this is what being an adult means, facing the consequences of your choices. Welcome to the real world." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the muffled hum of the city outside the glass walls. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out 2 bus tickets. One way, back to Old Town, the place my mother swore she'd never return to, where the houses leaned too close together and dreams suffocated before they could grow. I placed them carefully on the glass coffee table. "I won't leave you with nothing," I said evenly. "Here's a way home. Take it or leave it." Lily snatched one of the tickets, her hands trembling. She stared at it for a moment before her face twisted with rage. She ripped it in half, the paper tearing sharp in the stillness. "You think this is funny? You think you're better than us?" I smoothed my blazer, straightening to my full height. "No, I know I am." My mother stared at the shredded pieces scattered on the pristine floor. For the first time in my life, she didn't argue. She didn't sneer or scold. She just stood there, eyes wide-mouthed, trembling, as though she finally understood the truth. Her power over me was gone. I turned, the clicking of my heels echoing across the marble as I walked toward my office. Behind me, I heard Lily's ragged breathing, my mother's choked sob. I didn't look back. I had spent enough of my life looking back. At the threshold, I paused, one hand on the doorframe. "This company," I said without turning, "I built it with my own hands. Not yours, not hers, mine. And I'll keep living without you." I stepped inside, shutting the glass door softly behind me. Through the pane, I saw them, 2 shadows of their former selves, dwarfed by a world they couldn't control anymore. The city's skyline glittered beyond my office windows, tall and untouchable. For the first time, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't the scapegoat anymore. I wasn't invisible. I was free. The drive back to Old Town felt like slipping into a half-forgotten dream. The highway narrowed into cracked suburban road streetlights flickering over sidewalks buckled by tree roots. I slowed as the familiar block came into view, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. The house stood at the end of the street, hunched and weary, a shell of what it once pretended to be. The shutters hung crooked paint, peeled in curling strips and weeds, choked the yard where my mother once boasted of her perfect roses. A crooked for sale sign swung in the autumn wind, squeaking on rusty nails. I parked across the street, letting the engine idle before cutting it off. For a long moment I couldn't move. My breath fogged the windshield, heart pounding like I was a child again, waiting to be summoned inside to take the blame for something I didn't do. Finally, I forced myself out of the car. The air was sharp with the smell of damp leaves. Each step up the cracked walkway felt heavier, as though the ground itself tried to tether me to the past. The front door was ajar. I pushed it gently, and it creaked open. A rush of stale air met me, carrying dust and mold. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Cobwebs stretched across the corner's wallpaper, bubbled from water damage, and the carpet bore dark stains I didn't want to imagine. The living room seemed smaller than I remembered, its walls closing in. This was the room where I had stood countless times as my mother's accusations rained down. The room where Lily had basked in her role as the golden child, smirking while I took the punishment. I stepped farther in my boots, crunching on broken glass. The fireplace loomed blackened and cold. I closed my eyes and saw it vividly, the Christmas tree glittering, Lily tearing into expensive packages, while relatives cheered my own gift of a thrift store coat dangling from my hands. I heard the echo of my father's voice, dismissive. "Don't pout, Emily. Be grateful." The bitterness clung to me even now, decades later. I moved toward the kitchen, the room where I had once melted wax in secret, carefully pouring it into scavenged jars. Back then, it had been the only place I felt in control, creating something beautiful in a house built on lies. Now the counters sagged, coated in grime. The stove's door hung open, rust flaking from its edges. Still, I could see the ghost of myself bent over a battered pot, stirring wax with a wooden spoon, whispering to no one, "This is mine." Upstairs, the hallway groaned beneath my weight. My old bedroom door creaked when I pushed it open. The posters had peeled from the walls, the mattress collapsed in the middle. The closet door hung from one hinge, yet I could almost smell the faint trace of ink and paper from the notebooks I used to fill with sketches and plans, all of which had been mocked or stolen. This had been my cage, the place where I cried into pillows to muffle the sound. In the master bedroom, I stopped. The dresser still stood against the wall mirror, cracked down the center. I stared at my reflection, split in two, jagged and fractured, just like I had felt for so long. My throat tightened, but this time it wasn't despair, it was clarity. Back downstairs, I returned to the living room. I set my bag on the mantel and pulled out a candle, lavender, the first scent I had ever made. I struck a match, the flare briefly blinding. As the flame caught, the wax melted slowly, releasing a fragrance that curled through the stale air. The warmth spread, softening the sharp edges of the room. For a moment, I wasn't the scapegoat child or the invisible daughter. I was the woman who had built a company worth billions, who had turned pain into creation. I sat on the dusty sofa, staring at the small flame. Memories collided all at once. The Thanksgiving pie I was blamed for burning, Lily's triumphant grin as she opened her laptop, bought with my savings, my mother's hand tightening on my wrist as she accused me of ruining the family. The words, the wounds, the weight, they hovered like shadows. But the longer I stared at the flame, the smaller those shadows became. I whispered into the empty house, "No, you were wrong. I am not the reason this family fell apart. I am the reason I survived." My voice echoed off the cracked walls, strong and steady. The silence that followed wasn't oppressive anymore. It was freeing. I let the candle burn as I stood and walked to the door. One last look back and I realized the house wasn't a fortress anymore. It wasn't even a prison. It was just wood paint and ghosts. And ghosts have no power unless you let them. As I stepped outside, the autumn wind caught my hair cool and clean. The setting sun spilled across the street, painting the sagging house in gold. It almost looked beautiful, but I knew better. Beauty here had always been a mask. I climbed into my car and started the engine. The phone buzzed in the cup holder. Riley's name lit the screen with a message, "Call me as soon as possible. The press is calling you the youngest self-made billionaire." I laughed, a sound that felt strange in my chest, light and alive. From scapegoat to headline, from forgotten daughter to founder. I glanced once more in the rearview mirror. The house shrank as I pulled away, receding into the background of my life. I didn't belong to it anymore. The road stretched ahead, wide and waiting. For the first time, I wasn't running from the past, I was driving straight into my future. The warehouse buzzed with energy as I walked through the doors, the hum of machinery and the rustle of packing tape, a symphony of progress. 3 years ago, I had been sleeping on a train station bench with $70 in my pocket. Now 20 employees moved through the aisles, filling orders for lunar flame candles. My company, my empire, the inheritance I carved for myself. Pallets of jars stacked against the walls, the air heavy with lavender and sage. I breathed it in, letting pride settle where shame used to live. A delivery truck rumbled out of the loading bay, and one of my managers waved me over with a clipboard. "Another 3,000 units going to California," she said. My signature looked steady, confident, even elegant. Numbers danced in my head. Contracts with 2 major retailers, signed, revenue climbing past $3 billion in valuation. The girl who once hid a wrinkled coat under the Christmas tree had become the woman business magazines now photographed against city skylines. Still, success meant more to me than bank accounts. It meant proving I was more than the scapegoat they had painted me as. It meant rewriting the script, and part of rewriting it meant creating something beyond myself. That afternoon, I drove to the downtown community center. The old brick building bustled with life, its windows glowing against the winter dusk. Inside, folding tables were pushed together, notebooks spread open, pens scratching as a group of young women gathered. 30 of them now, all ages, all with stories of betrayal etched into their faces. Some had been excluded from their families, others manipulated, some cast aside like I once had been. They came here for more than lessons, they came for proof that survival was possible. I sat at the head of the table, setting down a candle that flickered brightly against the dim fluorescent light. "This," I said, pointing to the flame, "is what you can build out of the ashes they leave you with." Maya sat in the corner, her dark hair falling forward as she sketched nervously in her notebook. 16, with eyes too old for her face, she had been thrown out after refusing to give up art school for accounting like her parents demanded. I saw myself in her hunched shoulders and the way her fingers gripped the pencil like it was her last weapon. After class, she lingered. "How do you stop being afraid?" she asked softly, her gaze steady but trembling at the edges. "Afraid they'll come back. Afraid they'll find another way to hurt you." I reached for her hand, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. "You don't," I said honestly. "You don't stop being afraid. You just stop letting the fear control you." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I recognized that look. It was the look I had worn in the bathroom mirror years ago when I whispered to myself that freedom was worth the fear. Watching her square her shoulders, I felt the cycle break just a little. When the session ended, I walked through the community center halls, the echoes of laughter following me. Each young woman carried her own burden of injustice, but together they felt lighter. And in helping them, I felt lighter too. Revenge had carried me far, but healing others carried me farther. That night, I returned to my penthouse, the city lights spilling through floor to ceiling windows. My balcony overlooked a skyline that once felt unreachable. I set a candle on the railing and watched its flame flicker against the dark. My phone buzzed an unfamiliar number. I didn't need to check to know it was her. My mother finding new ways to call from new numbers. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it buzzed again. This time, Lily's voice cracked through a voicemail. "Emily, please. I have nothing left. I was horrible to you, I know that. But I can't do this alone." Her sobs rattled through the speaker before the message cut off. I didn't press replay. I didn't even save it. I set the phone face down on the marble counter and walked back to the balcony. The candle burned steady in the breeze. For once, I felt no urge to answer, no itch of guilt. Some calls I realized were meant to be missed forever. I leaned against the railing, the city humming below. A part of me wondered if revenge was complete now, if watching their empire crumble while mine soared was enough. But the answer came in the quiet around me. My revenge wasn't their downfall. It was my peace. It was the laughter of the young women at the community center. It was Maya's steady eyes when she whispered she wouldn't give up. I closed my eyes, letting the cold night air sting my cheeks. For years I had been defined by the cruelty of others. Now I was defined by what I built, by who I helped, by the fire I carried forward. When I opened my eyes, the candle still burned. Steady, bright, mine. The chandeliers dripped with golden light, and the ballroom pulsed with anticipation as another New Year's Eve gala began. Guests clinked crystal glasses, sparklers flickered in manicured hands, and laughter rolled through the air like music. I stood near the back, my gown a deep emerald that shimmered with each step, the press of cameras following me now, instead of ignoring me. 1 year ago, my sister's voice had pierced a night like this with cruelty. "No one wants you here." Tonight, the same world that had turned its back was about to applaud. The MC tapped the microphone, his voice booming over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we count down to midnight, we honor someone who has redefined success and resilience. Tonight, we celebrate Emily Parker, the founder of Lunar Flame, the youngest woman to build a $3 billion company." Applause exploded. Faces turned toward me, no longer cold or dismissive, but bright with admiration. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled for angles. I walked forward, slowly, heels clicking against marble, the sound echoing like a heartbeat. I felt their eyes on me, the same relatives who once avoided me at Christmas dinners, the same acquaintances who whispered I would never amount to anything. Now they craned their necks for a glimpse, desperate to be near. At one of the tables near the stage, I saw them. My mother's shoulders stooped in a faded gown that had once been designer, and Lily beside her, eyes swollen from tears, her dress from seasons ago. They looked so out of place among the sequins and tuxedos. For a moment, the years collapsed, and I was a child again, tugging at my coat, while Lily tore into glittering gifts. But this time, the roles were reversed. After my brief speech, simple words of gratitude, nothing more, I stepped down from the stage. The applause still rang in my ears as my mother rose quickly, intercepting me. "Emily," she whispered, her voice quivering. "Please, we're sorry. We need you." Lily followed, her hands clasped together, desperation written in every line of her face. "You're my sister. I know I was cruel, but help me. Please, I have nothing." I looked at them, really looked. For years they had stood taller, their shadows smothering me. Now they seemed small, fragile, like porcelain cracked beyond repair. The ballroom lights caught the sheen of sweat on my mother's temple, the tear tracks down Lily's cheeks. "Where were you," I asked softly, "on my birthdays, when you handed me second-hand coats?" My mother's lips parted, no answer escaping. "Where were you," I pressed, "when you stole my college fund, when you laughed, as I struggled, when you told me I wasn't wanted?" Lily broke, then sobbing into her hands. My mother reached for me, but I stepped back. "You thought I'd be fine on my own," I said, voice steady. "You were right. I am, and I did it without you." The music shifted as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I turned from them, each step taking me farther away. Their pleas followed thin, desperate threads unraveling into the air. I didn't stop. I didn't turn. 5, 4, 3. The ballroom lights dimmed, and the crowd roared with joy. Outside the tall windows, fireworks burst, painting the night in red and gold. I slipped through the doors into the cool midnight air. The phone in my clutch buzzed violently. Mom Lily Cousin's numbers I didn't recognize. Missed call after missed call piled on the screen 50, 80, 100. I silenced it, sliding the phone away. A car waited at the curb, the city stretched wide beyond. I climbed in the glass roof, offering a perfect view of fireworks raining light across the skyline. For a moment, I let my eyes close. The sound of the crowd cheering faded behind me. When I opened them again, the city glowed like it belonged to me. Because it did. I thought of the girl who had once slept at the train station clutching a duffel bag and 70 crumpled dollars. The girl who was told she wasn't wanted. The girl who nearly believed it. She had walked into the unknown and built an empire from wax and flame. Some revenge doesn't come with shouting. Some doesn't need confrontation. Sometimes the loudest revenge is living well. I leaned back, letting peace settle where pain once lived. And if you're listening, if you've ever been told you don't belong, ask yourself, would you fight to prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe success is the best payback like this story, and subscribe for more. The fireworks thundered above, but all I heard was the steady beat of my own freedom.